Final Fantasy XIV is filled to the brim with design choices that, whether deliberately or by accident, again and again appear to be implemented in the pursuit of avoiding confrontation. This is, in concept, not a bad thing. However, if there is something players are really good at sometimes, is moving the goalpost or adjusting their expectations, which can make this kind of design choice a terrible idea. Not just for specific categories of players, but for most players, just for completely different reasons. Let's start with one of the more clear examples: dungeon design. Most of the A Realm Reborn dungeons have very, very few walls between bosses. Pull as much as you like, just be careful. In fact, nothing really prevents you from pulling the bosses with the packs. Well, that's not always entirely true, as some of the dungeons require you to press a thing to open the door or do a little puzzle or something. But assuming the party presses those things on the way, nothing prevents the tank from continuing the train straight into the boss room. For several of these dungeons, this solves itself simply because the packs are easy enough that it doesn't really matter, and in other cases the quantity of packs between bosses are few enough that pulling everything is perfectly fine. But there are some exceptions, like Stone Vigil. By the time we get to the post-game dungeons of A Realm Reborn, we already start to see more walls, but around Heavensward, most dungeons forcibly split up the packs between two bosses with at least one wall. As we continue through the expansions, the 2 packs wall boss design becomes more and more prevalent. Every so often we have a mix-up like Mount Gold, where you can pull everything in some parts, or something like Origenics, where it might have 2 packs wall, 1 pack wall boss, or 1 pack wall, 1 pack wall, 2 packs wall boss. In contrast, Stone Vigil has 4 to 5 packs and then a boss, and aside from the gate before the final boss, which you can open during the pull if you like, there's nothing preventing you from dragging all the mobs into the boss room. There can be multiple explanations as to why this kind of design takes hold. One possible explanation is that in these old dungeons with few or no walls or gates, your party could just have the tank pull everything, have the party run past, and then just let the tank die while the party reaches the boss room. Then you can rest the tank and effectively skip all the packs. With Dawntrail introducing teleporters straight to the boss rooms once you reach them and, pull the boss, this becomes even easier, as the party could possibly just run as a group to the boss room, die on purpose during the boss fight to reset all the packs, and then simply use the teleporter to skip it all. Alternatively, the party could pull the boss while the tank is respawning, and then the 15-second auto teleport to the boss room can yoink the tank there. In other words, these convenience additions over the years can be abused to skip large parts of a dungeon in this design. However, considering the dungeon design that prevents this abuse itself was solidified, I'd say, close to half a decade before this convenience addition was added in the first place, I have a feeling this is not correlated. However, what is interesting to the subject of confrontation is that in these old dungeons where you can pull as much as you want, it is a much more common situation that players might not quite agree on what is reasonable to pull. I talked about this topic in my video, The Silent Language of Final Fantasy XIV Dungeons, and let me just say that, as predicted, the comment section has the essence of both of the exaggerated responses of screaming over people pulling everything with randoms and pulling only 1 pack at a time. The best conclusion I can draw from that is that, as I suggested, we can't all agree on what is considered the reasonable amount to pull. Some of us might agree on what is too little or what is too much, but we might not agree on what is exactly right. Hence, a dungeon like Stone Vigil, which leaves a lot of room for the party to choose how much they want to pull, simultaneously leads to potential confrontation, and by extension, arguments and frustration when things don't go as planned. Now, I want to really emphasize that this leads to potential confrontation, as I imagine like 90% or more of Stone Vigil runs resolved with whatever the tank desires, and that's that. In contrast, in your average modern dungeon where your options are 1 or 2 packs, and that's that, There's much less discourse about what is reasonable to pull. Except you can still genuinely end up with confrontations about this. Whether 2 packs is rushy tryhard stuff, yes really to those thinking that sounds ridiculous, or 1 pack is slacker time, again, yes really to those thinking that sounds ridiculous. That said, I'm not here trying to say who's right or wrong. The point here is actually that the dungeons being streamlined to a strict and specific design to minimize confrontation didn't. Your average modern dungeon probably also features over 90% of cases where everyone just follows whatever the tank does without a word. The non-confrontational design of these modern duties changed almost nothing for the players it should help, I guess is the word. Meanwhile, it takes options and agency away from everyone else. I'm not saying every dungeon should be a stone vigil where you can pull everything you want, but 2-pack wall boss is a little bit too frequent. Granted, if dungeon packs were a lot more threatening, we might not care for more than that, but letting the turbos pull more is also a way for them to customize the difficulty to their liking. So to summarize a bit of my observation here, design aspects of the game is being made quote-unquote less confrontational at the price of making things more systematic, more samey, more bland. However, for a large part of the player base, this was never necessary in the first place, and for those that it might have mattered for, they will never be fully satisfied with anything less than exactly 1 option, which, while possible in some aspects, is absolutely not possible in every aspect. So, with the ground rules, quote-unquote, sort of set, we can go a bit faster through other examples. In A Realm Reborn trials, Titan can jail you, leaving you unable to play until you get help, and specifically in the hard version, even if you get helped, it leaves you with a minus 75% damage output, damage down, that you need healer help to get rid of. Ramuh can horrify you, which leaves you unable to play for either until someone helps you, a blue circle randomly points at you, or for like a minute. Both of these examples are what many might consider just unfun mechanics since they leave you unable to play, but these are excellent examples of mechanics that both can lead to some neat teamwork, but also, when not done properly, can lead to frustration and so confrontation. We can also see this type of mechanic in Circus Tower with freezing on Scylla, but we can also see a different take on it with Ammon, where you need to have at least 1 player frozen somewhere. I believe the most recent non-extreme or above duty where this kind of mechanic came up without making saving your party member your only option was Holminster's Switch from Shadowbringers. I was going to say Hades, but he actually becomes untargetable himself during it, hence the asterisk. And if we go to normal raids, Alexander is filled with little points where you could end up having to confront someone. One oppressor dies too fast, people stepping on the trap buttons, someone needs to shove the bombs away with the gorilla, and then there's Refurbisher Zero, a normal raid boss that had the audacity to have real mechanics. By around Stormblood or so, most trial and normal raid bosses are nearly completely devoid of reasons to confront beyond spreads and stacks, and teamwork and team responsibility seems to get delegated to only the hard content. Even the most recent MSQ trial, don't worry, no footage or anything, there is a mechanic where you can get captured, quote-unquote, but instead of having your teammate save you, you instead save yourself. Which, to be fair, is an interesting new take, but still emphasizes this non-confrontational design where each player is largely responsible for their own survival. Except, of course, the healers need to heal everyone. This team game, in its pursuit of reducing confrontations and communication, became afraid of asking players in regular content to work together. But perhaps that's just my opinion. Another more complex aspect where this can come up is in job design. Over the years, it can be argued that many jobs in Final Fantasy XIV have been made simpler in some ways, making them significantly easier to pick up. Now, emphasis on the easier, because even if once you grasp it, it can be easy, a lot of players still find jobs like Black Mage or even Summoner a bit of an information overload, to say the least. And both jobs openly allow you to play them completely incorrectly. Now, it is perfectly possible this choice in design is unrelated to the confrontation angle, but at the same time, making every job somewhat manageable to pick up and play straight off rip should raise the average performance, right? Perhaps, but if the aim here is to make sure all players can meet the expectations of others, so there are no confrontations, then unfortunately the expectations of other players are typically at least partly colored by what you can expect. Which is to say, the easier a job is perceived to be, the greater the expectation is for you to play it well. Obviously, this one is never truly easy to solve. If you have jobs in the game that are supremely difficult to play, what can instead happen is that other players recommend you play an easier job if you aren't performing well enough on that job. You switch to the easier job and now you're expected to perform better because the easier job was, easier. But then again, was there something wrong with the job being a bit more complex so you might benefit from some advice? Now, these two aspects, jobs aiming to be relatively manageable to avoid having others confront you to give you advice, and regular content largely avoiding certain kinds of teamwork mechanics entirely for the same reason, not to mention locking in specific solutions and whatnot, leads to a third problem of its own: improvement through communication. Most of the content the average player will meet in the quote-unquote developing stages, meaning the MSQ I suppose, of their experience are easy enough that it doesn't really matter how well they perform. Unless the entire party is absolute turbo garbage, things will probably be fine. This means the average player is unlikely to be offered much advice on their journey, since it doesn't really matter now, does it? In addition to that, some players believe that it is actually rude to give quote-unquote unnecessary advice, with the understanding that while this advice might improve your performance overall, it wasn't necessary to beat this particular duty, so it was unnecessary. Let them figure it out themselves. This kind of perspective would also go hand in hand with the non-confrontational game design that we've talked about in this video. Where this gets particularly problematic is that, of course, even the regular content gradually increases the difficulty as you go, and if you use the tools you're given, then you can either match it or surpass it, but if you don't, problems quickly arise. I would say around Shadowbringers or so, problems start to really show when party members are not properly using their toolkits. But by the time you hit Shadowbringers, there are simply too many things that can be wrong. And yet, even this content can be beaten, eventually, still doing just the basics. So you probably still will not stand out enough that most players would feel like offering advice, assuming they even know where to start. And by the time you finally actually meet a wall where you need to bring it, you will likely be attempting an extreme or even savage, and by that point, there's no one that can help you right then, aside from maybe looking it up yourself. But as far as the other players around you are concerned, there's simply too much to cover. And honestly, in an extreme or savage party, if for instance, you're the Black Mage, then you are kind of supposed to be the authority on Black Mage, in that group at the very least. Not that that is always the case, you could easily be in a party with someone who knows even better, but the idea that you will find Black Mage guidance in a random savage group is an interesting prospect, to say the least. To try and summarize and conclude a bit on this, by Final Fantasy XIV attempting to sort of shove anything that even has the remotest chance of leading to a confrontation, mainly into harder content, it leads to a lot of regular content that seems kinda bland and samey, because an effective way to avoid a confrontation about how to approach things is by not offering many options. Yet, offering even 2 options still leaves the door open for confrontation. And yet, most players didn't have an issue to begin with. Or what? Similarly, whether jobs are easy or hard don't really make that much of a difference, because even the simplest job in 14 can still be completely misunderstood. The on-railsiness of jobs ranging from Viper, where it seems like it should be difficult to mess up, all the way to something like Black Mage, where someone might just choose to only use ice magic. If a job is made easier, players will expect more of the players playing it, and so confrontation can still end up happening. So at the very least, simplifying a job should not be done in the pursuit of making players less confrontational about it. And finally, by combining these two examples, by the time the game itself actually confronts you with a problem you have to overcome, there's simply too much to unpack, leading to a very different kind of quote-unquote confrontation. In savage groups, or even just extremes, if you're not doing enough damage, whether enough relative to what the party thinks you should be doing, or even just an individual in the party, or relative to how much the boss requires you to do to meet the damage check, there isn't much the party as a whole can do for you to fix that in the moment. This makes the simplest solution to the problem being kicked without a word, or players just leaving around you. And because of the community guidelines of 14, as well as the rules regarding third-party tools, which would give the insight for people to know that it is you, a lot of players, even if they wanted to tell you, decide not to, out of fear of potential repercussions. Besides, you're just some stranger to them. What does it matter, right? So, in a way, the non-confrontational game design is complete and succeeds in silence. Except when it doesn't. As I said, there are still those individuals in between that will find a way anyway. But what do you think? Do you regularly end up in discussions in random dungeons about what to pull and what to do, or are you also in the camp of doesn't matter if we cleared? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, aside from Cape Westwind and Vishap's Steps of Faith being outright removed trials replaced with solo duties, the only trial to ever be reworked is Thornmarch Hard. This fight was strict and tight enough that players commonly used markers for kill priority on the Morg's Guard and still regularly wiped to 1 or 2 players just focusing the king, causing his enrage to happen too early, leading to many a confrontation.